Firth, and I will be analyzing the discourse of psychology and the various conventions that make it addressed as it wants to be addressed. I chose these three articles. They're pretty different. They have some similarities, but I think that it conveys the general message that psychology is trying to get across to its reader. Um, sorry. Um, the way that one way that they're really similar is this abstract piece right here. Now, not all of them are labeled as abstract. Some of them are just paragraphs in the beginning of the this one. So two of them have abstract, but they all serve a very similar purpose. They really just provide introduction and define terms if they need to, but it's really just like, hey, narcissism, hey, schizophrenia, and if that's going to intrigue the reader, really, this is the piece that I see pathos coming into, and them using that as a persuasive technique, like, hey, this is what we're doing because this population is at risk, here's the research. And if you're like, wow, that's really interesting, um, then you're more likely to click on it and read and learn. Outside of that, they have kind of this outline piece too. Most of them have something like this. Two out of the three do, and most articles that I've read do have something to easier access everything. As far as language goes in these articles, it seems that it was really trying to establish itself as an empirical based science. A lot of the language is like much empirical, immediate attention, just referring to definitions in the field and how it is all um, goes back to science and is supported by evidence, because it really seems like psychology wants to establish itself as a social science, not pseudoscience, like more respected like the natural sciences. They have a pretty similar organizational technique, which is real effective because they go from the abstract, intriguing you, getting you to get into the article, the introduction, kind of narrowing down what their topic is and like specifically drawing you into what research they're looking at and what they gain from it. And then from there, going in through methods or defining the study, like taking a look at the studies and the results that they gathered, and at the end, bringing them all together in a conclusion or a discussion, summary, whatever they call it. And it's really just them looking at everything that they talked about in the article and providing an argument and usually potential further research that could be done. Which, another thing about this discourse that stands out is that it seems like it's constantly growing and they constantly want knowledge to be added, like all of science does, which is really cool. As far as introduction goes, this one is about narcissism and youth delinquency, and how that's all tied together. Um, so it really starts to define that, and right away I see a ton of articles that it's citing, like building that credibility, building that, using that pathos as or not pathos, sorry, as ethos as a persuasive factor to build their credibility and have this article taken seriously. It's like, look at all these sources that I'm referring to. It's not just empty words, which is pretty common for all of them. They're not all called introduction. The other two are called like overview, or this one is introduction, the other one's overview. So that's a little bit different. A lot of them define terms that they'll be using in this piece. So like child onset schizophrenia, COS, and then just how it's all going to be happening. And then it says it's going to get into genetics later, which it does. Really just framing the work for what it's going to do. Bringing me into the next part of it, and I like to start with this one because it's the most traditional kind of psychology article that I chose out of the ones that like I've seen. Most of them look like this. You got your abstract, your introduction, and then it looks at a survey that they actually physically did or that they're looking at. So right here it's talking about method and participants. This survey that was involved in like an inventory for children, and if you scroll down, after they present the results, they kind of present a table too, which is very common in this field, to kind of conceptualize what numbers they're talking about and get a better understanding of how to find like how they found correlations in that. So that's why I like to start with this one, because it's the most traditional and easy. Like, oh yeah, that is science. They're doing that, and they're. But it can also look really different because it is a discourse, a scientific discourse that's focused on people. So I like this one because it really contrasts the other one in the sense that there are no exact data. There's a ton of citations. It's constantly building credibility, but there's no like, this survey is what I specifically looked at to draw evidence from. It's drawing evidence from all over the field, defining fear, all the way down to drawing it into narcissism and neuroscience, and just creating and kind of making a pool of this different research, and it does that for both fear and then decision making, same type of pattern. And it's really just a discussion, because this conclusion will differ drastically from this one in the fact that it's like based off of evidence. We think like these things are how it's addressed, and it's like based off of evidence, this is how it should be addressed in more counseling setting, with thought patterns and stuff, not so like directly like physically clinical. As far as this article organizes that, it's more similar to fear and decision making, in which that it just goes over the studies that it looks like. This one is a bit more addressed in stereotypical scientific research, with talking about studies and percentages and things like that, and patients that were studied, as far as this intro part goes. And then it goes into another table that we see here, which is helping you like conceptualize that data that they were just talking about. So this one and this one are, I would say, more traditional psychology discourse, as it's looking to be presented today and taken seriously, not just a bunch of pseudoscience and philosophers just pondering these thoughts about humans that isn't supported by evidence and science. And it even goes into study of genetics and alleles, something very scientific, something very tangible to look at and say, hey, these genes were found in schizophrenics, and these genes put them more at risk. This is how they interact with their environment. So very interesting there, how that's different. After this results from their table are shown, it goes into kind of another part of just wrapping up what their results show in a discussion. And it's a really effective way to organize things. And at the end, just talking about like what they found, and always referring back to studies to keep the credibility up. And this is really where their logos comes in, persuasion factor, especially in this article, as it's literally it's not referring to one specific survey. It's referring to everything that they've discussed, and saying that like these feelings are more likely to be motivated by this than that because of what I discussed, and this is why this makes sense to treat it like this in a counseling setting, which I see a lot of logic behind that, and use of persuasion in that sense. Just the way that these are all so thick with material to build their credibility. It's they don't spare on words or anything like that. And then at the end of almost all of these is obviously references, but it's also like the present research emphasis, or like talking about like the research that exists currently in the field, or further research is called to fully identify. And yeah, this also has a discussion. This one really goes into clinical application, and saying, look at the research and the genes that we studied is relevant to the clinical practice today. So this is one that goes straight into the clinical field. These two focus more on extending research. This basically says this research calls to be applied today in psychology. So they all kind of serve different purposes, and there's a lot of different versions of psychological research that are out there, because it's a very complex topic. It seems that the way that they are presenting these articles and organizing them and formatting them, they're really just building an argument, but it's a scientific argument. It wants to be taken seriously, like these studies in biology and chemistry that are mixing chemicals and saying this is what happened as a reaction. They're like, we studied human beings over this period of time with this treatment, this is what happened. So everything that they do is trying to build credibility to this specific discourse. And I think they're doing a killer job, and yay science.